There is going to be some fun and fiction interwoven in the years 2011 through 2013, in between all those MBA textbooks. This is the first one of those. I read The Wind-Up Girl by Paolo Bacigalupi, I think that's how you pronounce it, in 2011. I probably started it before my first MBA class and finished it somewhere in the middle of it. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and I wrote this about it late in 2011. This is clearly the beginning of a series of books. I wasn't aware of this when I began reading it. In judging an introduction to a series, I think you have to evaluate it differently than you would a standalone novel. In general, this is a good science fiction book with some very transformative writing. However, the author uses some conventions that left me with a bad taste in my mouth. I am fortunate to have studied a good deal of Asian culture in my time, but I was still left confused at the meanings of the many italicized Thai and Chinese words that are used throughout the book. I believe he wanted readers to grasp their meanings through context in a way that was done so well with the Chinese in the Firefly series. But in the written medium, we are without the added visual and emotional cues needed for clarity. I kind of know what farang and why are. These are words in the book. But I have no clear understanding of kun, hiya, klong, or gai side. And those are a tiny percentage of the multitudes he used. In a similar fashion, the author goes so deep into the mythology of his not too distant future that he writes with similes and metaphors that are defined entirely by ideas that he neglects to explore. On page 132, a character, quote, stands in the middle of the factory like Cibiscosis in the middle of spring festival. He never really tells us what Cibiscosis is, although we know it's bad, and we have no real clue what it has to do with the spring festival. So how can we understand this simile? I think a fair number of science fiction readers appreciate this style because it allows for the reader to create their own ideas about what these things can mean. But for me, it seems weak. Some of those names for the plagues were weak too. It looked like he was just throwing random numbers and punctuation together. Anyhow, my complaints are probably explained by the fact that the author is setting the table for future books in the series. And in that measure, I'm sure he did a fine job. I won't be reading any more of the Nightshade books though, because it really just feels like a futuristic take on La Femme Nikita, and I feel like I've seen it all before. So that's actually a pretty long review considering some of my complaints about this book, but I think all of that is very accurate. I do feel like it was missing a lot of context, and I do feel like it was trying to lead you into the sort of world building that maybe people would be tempted to want to go into further reading for this. I think for me, it kind of goes a lot like folks who want to read series books are probably also interested in a lot of like TV series and those kind of things that are to be continueds. I always kind of put it separate with procedurals. So like if you loved Lost, for example, and you really wanted to see all of Lost and where the story went, I get that. That totally works. That's not the right fit for me. When I go to TV and when I go to books, a lot of times I'm looking for something that's a little bit more like a procedural or a standalone novel. So the TV equivalent of that would be something like Law and Order, where every series, there are through lines that go through everything, but you don't need to necessarily know everything about the main characters to enjoy the procedure that happens in the individual book or in the individual TV show. So that's kind of what I felt was missing from this, that I didn't feel like it stood alone on its own here. And a lot of times in my Goodreads reviews, I'll talk about how much of a struggle it is for me to enjoy series books. A lot of times when I've read them in here, I'll mention that in the review. There is one coming up, and I am kind of in the throes of it right now, which is the Annihilation series. The movie Annihilation is part of a series of books. I read the first one, I think it was just last year, 2022 or 2021, and I loved it so much that I'm going to continue reading it. I think it's 3 books called the Western Reach trilogy. So it can happen, and I do sometimes like series books. I read the entire Harry Potter series. I read the entire Dark Tower series too, But in general, I definitely need a book to stand on its own, and then have the kind of interesting stuff to bring me through to the others. So I think that really the people who love this book are probably those that are looking for some heavy science fiction with some deep world building that is a tease for the things that are going to be uncovered as you get into the series more going forward. So if you're into that sort of not too distant future, the post-apocalyptic, futuristic sci-fi, I think you might like this. But if you're looking for something that stands on its own, I think The Wind-Up Girl kind of falls short in terms of that. So Wind-Up Girl, again, I think the name is pronounced Paolo Bacigalupi. I give it 2 out of 5 stars in 2011. Till next.